study by the Hopkins group. We did it differently. We decided to do it when people are already expert in therapeutic EUS, while the Hopkins group decided to look at the data globally. So that's why they had to require more procedure for them to master EUS guided GE compared to us. Now, there's different technique to be able to create this anastomosis. You can use the balloon technique, the double balloon technique, the rendezvous technique, the double scope technique, node technique. I mean, there's a lot of technique. But what seemed to be clear is you had to try to do it in a one-step using hot cautery, not over the wire. So we used to think that the cell digger technique was the best technique. Well, apparently no, because the working channel of the lumina-posing middle stent is very small, so it creates a lot of pressure and push the bowel. So the recommendation is actually to access the bowel using hot cautery, then place the wire instead of placing the wire and then advancing the lumina-posing middle stent. So studies have confirmed that technique, so the freehand technique seemed to be the best way to succeed the procedure. A lot of debate exists. Should we always use 20 millimeter? Should we dilate once the stent is placed? Here is a procedure, a demonstration using what we call the Milan technique. The group of Milan described very nicely accessing the small bowel with a catheter preloaded with a wire, or you can actually directly access it with an nasogenial feeding tube preloaded with a wire. In this case, we're going to do an exchange. We're going to access with a ball tip, place a wire across the ligament of Trites, replace the ball tip by a nasogenial feeding tube. You can see the nasogenial feeding tube is advanced all the way into the small bowel, across the ligament of Trites. And then once the catheter is in place, we're going to remove the wire, and this will permit to immobilize the nasogenial feeding tube. Oh, let me just go back here. I'm not sure what happened here. It jumped. Okay. So once this is done, what we're going to do, we're going to inflate the bowel. You can see the small target becomes bigger. We're going to confirm further position. I like to puncture with a 90 gauge needle to kind of have an idea exactly where I am. I like being able to be close or at the ligament of Trites. That's the portion that is the most immobile of the bowel. There's a ligament there. So here we are now deploying the first flange using cautery. Here we are, the first flange is deployed. Once the first flange is deployed, the apposition is then performed between the bowel and the stomach. We then place the wire. This is the moment when you place the wire after deploying the first flange and doing the apposition. And then the second flange is deployed into the scope and pushed out. And you can see it lay very nicely at the anastomosis. We like to dilate to oppose the bowel to the stomach so that we have better apposition. And we typically place also a pigtail to decrease friction with the opposite wall of the bowel. So if we look at this data which combine benign and malignant, what we notice is that the efficacy and safety of this procedure is definitely improving over time when we look at the different data. And what is very important to notice that in this study that we performed is the amount of severe adverse events are very limited. And I think that's the message. You're not going to be able to completely eliminate adverse event. It's impossible, unfortunately. But the good news is the severity is not as bad as it used to be thought. Another study here from the Barthé group, who's also a pioneer in this technique in Europe. And you can see here what they're trying to demonstrate, that over time, there is a trend of doing more and more benign diseases compared to malignant. And when you compare the two groups, they break it down in two groups here, there's really no much difference except that the benign population has a younger age. And that is an important message. So because we have this technique now, we started offering it to a younger and more healthy population. So it's very important when you have that to have data that are safe. And you can see here over time between the year 20 2018 to the year 2023, the proportion of benign diseases undergoing this technique is increasing. So the message is we are doing a good job in decreasing complication, and we are targeting more and more benign patients. Now, adverse events exist, and unfortunately, when you embark on those kind of procedure, you gotta be able to deal with adverse events. And the range is anywhere between 7 to 27%. In reality, in expert hand, it's supposed to be around 10%. So the biggest problem is a misdeployment of the luminapose middle stent. You can be across the stomach. It can be across the stomach with an opening in the small bowel. It can be into the small bowel on the other side of the wall of the stomach. And sometimes you create what we call a type 4 anastomosis, which is an anastomosis between the stomach and the colon, and is much easier to do than one can imagine. So let's explore a few combination of complications. Here, in one case, patient with severe sclerosis, radiotherapy, hop, the stent is unfortunately slipping into the peritoneum, but in this case, we had a wire. So all we have to do once you have a wire, and if you still have preserved access to the small bowel, is to bridge the stent. So we took a TTS stent from the esophagus, and we stent the stent. Here we are, stenting the stent. So the first flange of the stent is into the bowel across the lambs. The second flange of the stent is into the stomach. So we bridged in, and actually I'm happy to tell you this patient did extremely well. He didn't even require admission because we were able to completely bridge the stents. Now, it is not always so easy. Sometimes you have a bad surprise. This is a patient that has cholangiocarcinoma and that was cured. He has a GJ here because there was complete obliteration of the pylorus, and once we deploy the stent, you can see we see a small bowel. So in this case, the stent is literally facing the bowel. So you can do two things. You can remove the lambs, put an Ovesco, and start from scratch. We decided, because the bowel was literally in front of us, to take a double channel scope, grab with one of the working channel the bowel, and with the other working channel, we're gonna take a needle knife, and we're gonna re-access this bowel. So once the needle knife is into the bowel, we're going to inject contrast, confirm indeed that we are into the small bowel. Very important to do that test. You don't want to do this into the peritoneum, or you have a guaranteed peritonitis. Once you have that, same thing, we're going to then bridge the lambs with a TTS stent of a 20 millimeter. Here it is. We're deploying it. We are into the bowel, bridging, and the other end is into the stomach. So we like also to suture the stent to the stomach, just to be on the safe side. This patient, I'm happy to tell you that she's doing extremely well. She still sends me email every Christmas to thank me because she's able to eat pizza. So as a conclusion, EUS GG has become the preferred technique for palliation of a malignant goo. There is growing interest in performing this technique in benign disease. Adverse events seem to be the same as malignant disease. The most important question is now, what is the durability? Hence, it's very important to enroll those patients into a dedicated database and follow them up.